once again to the Upper Room. Great to be with you as always. We're in this series we're calling Dynamic in the Book of Acts. The dynamic work of the Spirit of God in and through the early church is what we're studying throughout the Book of Acts. We are going to skip chapter 11 actually in this lesson, go right to chapter 12, because in chapter 11 it's just a recap really of what took place in chapter 10. Add in a few details about the growth of the church up in Antioch, but for the most part it's material we've covered already. So we jumped to chapter 12 and I came across these evaluations, which are actual evaluations of employees that I found fascinating. Let me go down a list of about 7 or 8 of them, and they will connect us into chapter 12 of the book of Acts. And here are the ones I came across. Since my last report, this employee has reached rock bottom and has started to dig. I would not allow this employee to breed is the next one. Some of these are brutal, just warning you. This employee is depriving some village of an idiot. He doesn't have ulcers, but he's a carrier. That may be my favorite. You may know some carrier of ulcers. He brings a lot of joy when he leaves the room. He donated his brain to science before he was done using it. And finally, if you gave him a penny for his thoughts, you'd get change. All right, those are actual evaluations of employees. And what I want to connect that to is the fact that there are not just employees that are inept. There are rulers of nations that are inept in comparison to the brilliance of God. And that's what we run into. It's nothing new, and I'll explain that. But in reality, we tend to look at national and world leaders as experts, as highly intelligent, very wise. But in reality, we find out they're like these employees. They're pretty inept, especially in the context of how they interact with God. Way too many. In fact, I'll go so far as to say most world and national leaders fight against God instead of cooperating with God, and the results are truly tragic. Whether we're talking about Genghis Khan or Attila Han or Napoleon or Stalin or Hitler or Mao Zedong, it doesn't really matter. Compared to the brilliance of God, these guys thought they were something special, but it never ended well for them. Have you ever noticed that? In fact, most of the world leaders, national leaders in the Bible followed that pattern as well. Of course, we start with Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh not only put his country through plagues, but he lost his son in the process and then lost his entire army as well. Some believe he even died in the Red Sea. It did not end well when it comes to Pharaoh arguing and fighting against God. But again, that's what the whole Bible is filled with. In 1 Kings chapter 14, Jeroboam and his son are stricken by God. In 1 Kings 22, Ahab took an arrow through the heart, and in doing so, he fulfilled the prophecies that dogs would lick up his blood. Then there's 2 Kings chapter 19, where the Syrian king Sennacherib had 185,000 of his soldiers killed by an angel in one night. We move forward to Daniel chapter 5, where Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall as he's having a party with the items that he stole from Israel, and he sees the handwriting on the wall, and that night the Persians come in and invade him and kill him. In fact, after the split of the kingdoms to the north and to the south, do you realize that every king in the north rebelled against God? Every single one of them throughout history. And it never ended well for any of them. I take you to Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is like a stream of water directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever he pleases. In other words, God is in charge, not these kings, not these rulers. It's just a lot of bad decisions made by national and world leaders throughout history. I have a friend named Steve who put up a meme the other day And I love it because it speaks to this. Everything happens for a reason, but sometimes the reason is that my name is Steve, and Steve makes a lot of bad decisions. Kings make a lot of bad decisions when they fight against God, and it never works out well. I'm going to ask you to turn to Psalm chapter 2, and we're going to read the first 5 verses together, and it really sets the foundation for where we're going in Acts chapter 12. We begin with verse 1. Why are the nations so angry? Why do they waste their time with futile plans? The kings of the earth prepare for battle. The rulers plot together against the Lord and against his anointed one. Let us break their chains, they cry, and free ourselves from slavery to God. But the one who rules in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then in anger he rebukes them, terrifying them with his fierce fury. Okay, is that possible that God laughs at us when we make plans that fight against him, that think that we can free ourselves from his rule? Well, first let's talk about laughter in general. You've heard laughter is the best medicine. I take you to an article from Science News Today. Laughter is one of the few things that transcends culture, language, and time. It reduces stress hormones, strengthens the immune system, eases pain, and even protects the heart. But the benefits are not confined to the body. They ripple outward, shaping our social bonds, emotional resilience, and overall quality of life. Chemically, laughter releases a cocktail of feeling good neurotransmitters. Dopamine surges, providing a sense of reward and pleasure. Serotonin levels rise, contributing to mood stability. Endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, flood the system, reducing physical discomfort and creating a sense of euphoria. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, is also stimulated, deepening feelings of trust and connection with those around us. Laughter is a gift from God. He created laughter. Without God, there would be no laughter. There'd be nothing to laugh about. So to read in Psalm chapter 2 that God laughs at those who make plans against God makes total sense. But he gave that to us, and it is one of the healthiest things we can do. So when life is over, who has the last laugh? So the answer to the question, is laughter a good thing? Is it really the best medicine? Absolutely. I think it was Norman Cousins that was given a diagnosis of cancer, and he spent his time looking at movies that made him laugh, and it was healing for him. But it is healing. It's a gift from God. And the second question is, well, then, does God actually laugh? We just saw it. The question is, does he laugh at human beings? He does. Not at those who have misfortune, but those who plan to fight against him and plan to live as though he does not exist. And all that talk about national and world leaders and kings and rulers and laughter will bring us to our passage in Acts chapter 12. We begin with what we're going to call chaos, and chaos is the typical nature of a twisted world. The last time we were with Peter, he was back up in Caesarea, where he shared the good news of Jesus Christ with a Roman officer. Now he's back in Jerusalem. We pick it up in verse 1. About that time, this is about 44 AD. So we're talking about 10 or 11 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. It goes on to talk about King Herod Agrippa. Who was he? He was the grandson of Herod the Great. You remember Herod the Great was the king when Jesus came on the scene as a baby, and he tried to murder him, ended up murdering loads of other babies just to get to a supposed king that's come to the earth. And so you see how nasty and wicked he was. He died shortly after, though, the birth of Jesus, as I believe it's the book of Luke tells us. But that's the reign of terror, the Herods, who were Jews only by name, in name, and who were pawns of Rome. And so it was all about protecting their kingdom and protecting their path to being protected by Rome. And so what we find with King Herod Agrippa is he will do anything to promote himself And he wants to make the Jews happy who are tired of the followers of Christ talking about Jesus being someone worth following, being the Son of God. So King Herod Agrippa began to persecute some believers in the church. In fact, verse 2 says he had the apostle James, that's John's brother, killed with a sword. That was the penalty for someone who was leading others to other gods. They could use a sword. So it was believed by Herod and the Jewish people that James was leading people to another god. And so he becomes the first apostle to be martyred, to be murdered. And that's what takes place. But it's not enough for King Herod. He goes on, when Herod saw how much this pleased the Jewish people, he also arrested Peter. This took place during the Passover celebration. We've talked a lot about that, one of the great festivals that brought millions to Jerusalem. Then he imprisoned Peter, placing him under the guard of 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring Peter out for public trial after the Passover. He could not do it during the Passover, but he knew people would hang around, and this would be a great spectacle as he puts Peter to death. That's absolutely his goal, his desire, his aim. And when the Passover is over, Peter is going to die. He's being guarded by 4 guards of 4 units each. I'm not great at math, but I think that's 16 guards guarding Peter. Who is this guy? Like this terrorist, you know? That's certainly what they felt about him. So he's got 2 guards chained to him. We'll get to that. 2 guards right on the outside of his cell, and then they would take shifts with the other 12 guards. But 16 in all to make sure that this dangerous fisherman from Nazareth, didn't hurt anybody, didn't escape. And that brings us to our unique location, and oh, might I add, difficult location in which to film. This has been a struggle. We'll continue pressing on. Right over my right shoulder, you will see a prison, and it is not just any prison. It is a famous prison. It's called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. We're in Florence at the highest security, maximum security prison there is, actually. Some terrorists, some of the greatest threats to our nation are housed right behind me. This maximum security prison actually is fairly new. It opened January 10th of 1995, so it's only 30 years old. It's not Alcatraz, but they compare it to Alcatraz because you're not getting out of here. The guys in there, and they are guys, are the scariest dudes that have been put away in our country. I could give you a list of names, but I don't want to impress you right now. This is something else. By the way, we're driving on up this road. There's some Amish right up here, close to the prison. They're so brave. So, to get an idea of Peter's situation, it's this. It is maximum security. They didn't hold anyone more tightly than they did Peter. He wasn't going anywhere. He would be a threat no longer. We've got to have him safe and secure until we want to stick a sword in him. That's what the king is thinking. That's his plan. Verse 5 says, that's where Peter is, but what is the church doing? What are the followers of Christ doing? Verse 5 begins, but while Peter was in prison, the church prayed very earnestly for him. Now in that verse, when it says they prayed earnestly, the word earnestly is a fascinating word. It's only found a couple more times in the New Testament, and it is the word ektenes, and it means to stretch. It's a medical term that means when a muscle is stretched to its fullest extent. In other words, nothing more physically could be done than what is being done. It's incredible strain and struggle. When's the last time you strained like that in prayer? We know that Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, ektenes was what happened. Interestingly, Peter uses it in his book, 1 Peter 4:8, when he says, most important of all, continue to show deep, that's the word, love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. Deep, ektenes, stretch it beyond limits, to the ultimate limits, your love for one another. Isn't that a cool word? That's the kind of prayer meeting they're having on behalf of Peter. Will it make any difference? And again, James in his letter, chapter 5, verse 16 says, the earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. And so that's the chaos going on. You know, really the leader of the church, the new church, is in prison. Most likely, after the weekend, he'll have a sword put through him. The church obviously is stressed to the max over this, and they're earnestly praying for him. As you know, chaos is the way of this world, but now we come to confusion becoming clarity. There's a lot of confusion. What's going to happen? What should we do? Discussion question, however, how are you doing at sleeping? Most people I know talk about sleeping a lot and our challenges with sleeping. How is the sleeping going for you? If you pay attention, you're going to listen to people talk about sleeping all the time. It is a big topic in our society because most people are challenged to sleep. At least as we get older, I've found that it's become quite the challenge for us. But what do we do about it? Is it really that big of a deal in America? I think you'll find it is. Americans spend $427 million a year on over-the-counter medicines that you get without a prescription. 427 million, and we spend $1 billion, that's B for billion, dollars a year on prescription medication for sleep. I'm not even including things like white noise and TVs that are left on to help us sleep. You think it's a struggle in our nation, in our culture, to sleep? There is so much anxiety. There's so much going on in our hearts and minds. You'd think with as wealthy of a nation as we are, everybody would be content and happy and sleeping would be no problem whatsoever. Sleep deprivation, sleep challenges really have become one of the major topics for us in America. So how is Peter doing in prison, knowing that the next day he'll probably have a sword stuck through him? You think he's wishing he had some white noise? Well, let's see. Verse 6, here we go. The night before Peter was to be placed on trial, he was asleep, fastened with 2 chains between the 2 soldiers. Others stood guard at the prison gate. Suddenly there was a bright light in the cell, and the angel of the Lord stood before Peter. The angel struck him in the side to wake him up. The night before he's going to have a sword pierce him, he's sleeping like a baby. I don't know about you, but when I read this, I just can't believe it. How is that possible? No white noise, no medication, chained to 2 soldiers? Really? But that's the reality of Peter the night before. Total peace. How is that possible? Let me give you 2 reasons why it could be possible. Number 1, we have to go back to John chapter 21. This is where Jesus confronts Peter after Jesus has risen from the dead, and Jesus has said, hey, meet me up north in Galilee on the mountain, but Peter gets itchy feet and itchy hands and says, I gotta go do something, so he goes fishing, and he takes the guys with him fishing, remember that? And Jesus is on the shore fixing breakfast for them. He calls him, first he says, have you caught any fish? Remember that funny scene? Oh no, we haven't, we've been out all night. Try the other side of the boat. And Peter had to be thinking, we've already tried both sides of the boat all night. But Jesus had been redirecting the fish away from the boat. He directs them to the right side of the boat, and guess what? They catch the biggest catch they've ever caught. The nets are tearing. Peter realizes what's happened. And now Jesus has this conversation with him. He's going to restore him. He does the whole thing where he asks him 3 times, do you love me? Peter says, oh, you know I love you, but I don't love you that way. You know that. I fail. And then he says this in chapter 21, when you are older, or when you are old, you will have your hands tied, you will not dress yourself, and you'll be led to your death. And that's John's commentary saying he was talking about his death. But the key phrase is when you are old. Peter is not old here. He may be like 40 years old. And so this night he knows that Jesus predicted, I won't die till I'm old. I think Peter has actually come to believe that Jesus is always right. Have I mentioned that before? He's always right. He told Peter, until you're old. When you're old, this is how you will die, and he will, but he's not old yet. He believes he won't die. He can sleep. And so there's the past promise from Jesus, and then there's his past experience. This is his third time being put in prison, and he survived the first two. This is really getting comfortable for him. That's why I think he can sleep so soundly that an angel can show up and the whole cell turns bright, and yet he doesn't wake up. The angel has to punch him in the side to wake him up. Isn't this fun stuff? And so we're there in verse 7. He's punched him in the side to wake him up, but still you're going to find that Peter isn't really awake. He's still kind of groggy, and the angel says to him, get up, quick. The chains fell off his wrists. Then the angel told him, get dressed, put on your sandals. So he did. Now put on your coat and follow me, the angel ordered. Verse 9, so Peter left the cell following the angel, but all the time he thought he was having a vision. He thought he was dreaming. He didn't realize this was actually happening. They passed the first and second guard posts and came to the iron gate leading to the city, and it opened all by itself. Great stuff. So they passed through and started walking down the street, and then the angel suddenly left him. Watch this. Peter finally came to his senses. It's really true. This isn't a dream. The Lord sent an angel and saved me from Herod and from what the Jewish leaders had planned to do to me. He finally wakes up. Have you ever experienced that? Where you wake up and you're so glad that it was a dream or wasn't a dream? At the end of my high school years, I went to a cabin, my aunt and uncle's cabin on the beach of Oregon with a friend. This friend was a football player as well. We were friends through football, but he was a believer in Christ as well. And his name was Dwayne, and Dwayne was a monster. He was 6'3", 220. He'd play football at Montana State. After this event, he would be on scholarship there. So we're in this cabin, and we're just in sleeping bags. So we're lying there in the middle of the night. It's all dark, no one else there. And all of a sudden, he raises up, and he grabs me by the shoulders and says, we got to get out of here. We're surrounded. Let's go, let's go. And he stared at me. And he looked away, and he went back to sleep. I'm like, oh man, that was scary. I don't know if this was scary for Peter, but we know he was excited. I was excited that he was dreaming and Dwayne went back to sleep. He is excited now to know this was not a dream. Verse 12, when he realized this, he ran as fast as he could out of the city to save himself, to go hide in the hills. No, he doesn't do that. He went to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, who is the same John Mark who will write the Gospel of Mark based on Peter's recollection of the time with Jesus. So Peter runs to Mark's mother's house. She must have been wealthy because she's going to have a servant show up in the story here. And it was there that many were gathered for prayer. Again, they met from house to house. They prayed from house to house. He knows where to go. He doesn't run for the hills to save himself. He runs towards community. And he does that because he wants to encourage them. He's not looking for them to protect him. He doesn't need that. Verse 13, he knocked on the door of the gate, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to open it. When she recognized Peter's voice, she's familiar with him because of his teaching. She was so overjoyed that instead of opening the door, she ran back inside and told everyone, Peter's at the door, he's standing at the door. Now what follows, I don't know if it's double-mindedness or what it is, but they respond to her. Again, she's a woman. In that day and age, she's a servant. Her word means nothing. They respond, you are out of your mind. Hadn't they been praying that God would do something for Peter? You are out of your mind, they said. She insisted. They said, it must be his angel. They believed that everybody had their own private angel, and maybe we do, I don't know. So they're thinking that's his personal angel that has decided to speak with his tone, if you will. That's the best they could come up with, because surely God wouldn't do a miracle when they ask for a miracle, right? Verse 16, meanwhile, Peter continued to knock. When they finally opened the door and saw him, they were amazed. He motioned for them to quiet down, and he told them how the Lord had led him out of prison. God gets the credit. He doesn't say, I broke out of prison. Ha, ha, you should have seen what I did to those guards. No, it was God, and he gets the credit. Tell James, he says, and the other brothers what happened, and then he went to another place. Now, who is this James? Well, we know that James, the brother of John, has just been murdered by King Herod. This is James, the brother of Jesus, who was the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. We started with chaos, and we saw it there as Peter's on the verge of being murdered by Herod. Then it went to confusion. Peter's confused. The church is confused. But what we know with this walk with Christ is that confusion, when the Spirit of God is allowed to move in and through us, confusion turns to clarity. And that's the transformation that becomes typical. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. So all of us who have had that veil removed, that veil of confusion removed, can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord who is the Spirit. When we talk about the Spirit, we're talking about the Lord. If we talk about the Lord, we're talking about the Spirit. When the Lord who is the Spirit makes us more and more like Him, as we are changed into His glorious image, we are transformed. We become clear about what life is about, just as our Lord is very clear about it. And they get some clarity in this moment. Peter got some clarity. The church gets some clarity. All came out of chaos, but the Spirit of God leads us to clarity. And now we finally come to the last part of this passage, and we're going to call it calamity. All right? Calamity awaits anyone who thinks they can take God on. And that is the typical, tragic ending to a life of anyone who thinks God cannot stand up to them. There has always been, and there always will be, those who take credit that only should go to God. It's our nature to take credit for things that only God does. You might recall that in 587 BC, the Babylonians came in and conquered Jerusalem and took many of the nation of Israel captive, and that was under Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, even though he saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive the fiery furnace, and he was in awe of the God who would protect them. Remember, there was a fourth in the fire. But in time, he goes back to being who he is, this arrogant king, know-it-all, and believing he should get all the credit for everything. And so he becomes so full of himself, if you remember this, that God puts this spell, if you will, on him, and he goes mad, and he's out in the pastures and the fields as an animal for 7 years. As an animal. This is the king that was the most powerful king in the world at the time. And he's grazing in the fields around. I see a bunch of fields around us. That's Nebuchadnezzar. He took credit for what only God should get credit for. So when that happens in our lives, when we start taking credit for things for which only God should be credited, calamity is right around the corner. It was for Nebuchadnezzar, and now for Herod Agrippa, who would put one apostle to death, who would try to put another apostle to death. What happens next? We pick the story up in verse 18. At dawn, okay, so this is the morning after Peter is released from prison. And so the next morning, Herod is excited to kill him and to gain favor with all the Jewish people in Jerusalem. So at dawn, there was a great commotion among the soldiers about what had happened to Peter. Herod Agrippa ordered a thorough search for him. When he couldn't be found, Herod interrogated the guards and sentenced them to death. Afterward, Herod left Judea to stay in Caesarea for a while. We talked about Caesarea, it's on the coast. I need a vacation, he says. I just need a vacation. Kill some guards, I'll go on vacation, all right? Now we pick it up with his story as it continues in verse 20. Now Herod was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. Okay, those are two cities in the area called Phoenicia that he'd been probably negotiating with, like tariffs, like if you had a president that loved to negotiate tariffs and taxes on other cities and other countries and things like that. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. But that's what he was into, and he was angry with them because it wasn't going well. They came and sent a delegation to make peace with him because their cities were dependent on Herod's country for food. The delegates won the support of Blastus, Herod's personal assistant, his treasury director. And so you see this politics thing going on, and he is not going to give them food. They come and basically kiss his feet, kiss his ring, say, we want to make peace with you, we need your food. That's the story. And an appointment with Herod was granted. When the day arrived, Herod put on his royal robe, sat on his throne, and made a speech to them, to the delegates. The people gave him a great ovation, shouting, "It's the voice of a god, not a man." This is pure politics, right? You're a god. We just worship you. And he said, don't worship me. Remember Peter doing that? Saying, don't worship me? Not Herod. He says, I love it. Worship me. Treat me like a god. Instantly, an angel of the Lord struck Herod with a sickness because he had accepted people's worship instead of giving the glory to God. So he was consumed with worms and died. What's going on? We're back to the previous lesson where we talked about putting people on pedestals, right? And how that is not how God's kingdom works. He is being put on a pedestal and he loves it, he accepts it. The point is, calamity is the result of challenging God. It is the result of taking the honor of God that only God deserves, and he is eaten by worms from the inside out. Can you imagine anything more disgusting or painful? So we go to the last verse we're going to cover, verse 24. Meanwhile, that's happening over in Caesarea. Meanwhile, the word of God continued to spread, and there were many new believers. And I'm going to add this, and God laughed. And so as I mentioned, we're in Florence, just outside of this maximum security prison, not unlike what Peter experienced. But we just came from Colorado Springs, actually Castle Rock, where we visited our dear friends, the Levers, and we stopped in Colorado Springs at Focus on the Family. That is there as a result of Dr. James Dobson's faithfulness to God to serve him. If you've never been there, you need to visit that place. Well, he passed away, Dr. James Dobson, a couple months ago. They had his service 2 weeks ago, actually. And lo and behold, I came across something he wrote for his service. Dobson wrote this for his service. As you take part in this memorial service, how strange it is for me to be writing these words, which won't be read until after I'm gone. I hope you realize how truly thankful I am for the myriad of ways you blessed my life so abundantly and significantly. Some of you are members of my family, an extended family. Some of you have been my friends over the years. Some have been colleagues, while still others have been fellow church members and faithful supporters. I thank God for allowing me the privilege of knowing and loving you during my years on earth. No man could have asked for a better life. You know my heart, and I hope that when you reflect on our relationship, you will think of me as a man who tried to serve God with every fiber of my being, every day of my life. The walk of a believer is never an easy one, but the reward of seeing the Lord face to face for all eternity is worth any temporary struggle on earth. Don't forget, I'll be watching for you just inside the eastern gate. I love that. Our family's going to meet just inside the western gate, where we'll celebrate a family reunion the likes of which the world has never seen. Indeed, in that kingdom, all of God's children will be reunited for eternity under the banner of Jesus Christ. And then, he says, he will wipe every tear from our eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things will have passed away. He's quoting Revelation 20, verse 4. And then he finishes this note for his service this way. My final charge to you is simply this: be there. Discussion question, last one. What did you get from James Dobson's note for his service? What did you hear there? I did not hear anything about religion. All I heard was relationship. My relationships with you all, my relationships with Jesus, that's all that mattered in my life. I have mentioned the be there words that in the past that have meant so much to me, that came from him, and it came from a moment when he was playing basketball with the famous Pete Maravich. They were just playing some pickup basketball at lunchtime, and Pete Maravich, after talking to Dr. Dobson and saying how great it was to play basketball again, turned around and dropped dead. Dr. Dobson said he went home and talked to his kids, specifically his son Ryan, and said, I just experienced something that was pretty cool, because he went to heaven, because he became a believer in Jesus later in life, but he didn't get to say goodbye to his family. So I'm telling you now, goodbye, in case that happens to me. And the only two words I want you to remember is, no matter what you accomplish in life, I don't care if you're rich or famous or anything like that, all I care is that you be there. If I don't get to say this to you before I die, be there. Be there at the East Gate. Be there in heaven. I can't wait for the reunion. And that's how he ends his note at his service. Be there. I don't know how you feel about going to the dump. I don't know if you ever go to the dump. About once or twice a year we go, to take trash to the dump, and it's my least favorite thing. I'd rather go to the dentist, to be honest with you. But the other day, Caleb and I went to the dump. It's usually Caleb and I going, and Caleb loves to talk to everybody, as you know. And so we got to the dump and we pulled in. One of the reasons I hate going to the dump is there's always a guy there in a big bulldozer pushing trash around, but he's watching to see if you're going to throw out something that shouldn't be thrown out. And I just feel those eyes bearing down on me, boring through me. If you throw out electronics or a mattress or some paint, you're going to here, probably. That's what I hate about going there. And so my goal is very clear. Get in, get out, don't be noticed, get out of there. Well, again, Caleb, many of you know Caleb. We back up, we get out, the guy in the bulldozer is not far away looking at us. I'm getting nervous. And of course, Caleb wants to talk to him, so he comes down out of his bulldozer and Caleb talks to him, which is the last thing I want. Caleb says, how's it going? He goes, fine. Kind of a gruff old guy, fine. He says, are you busy today? Who do you know that goes to the dump and asks the guy working if they're busy today? That's Caleb. So by now, the guy has walked over to our truck, and he's much closer than I'm ever comfortable with. Again, I'd rather have a dentist closer to me. But Caleb continues the conversation, says, how's it going? Are you busy today? And the guy's response reminded me of what we're talking about here. He said, just another day at the dump. Trash is trash. And he smiled. And I think of that when I think of this world. It's another day at the dump. Trash is trash. What we just saw in this text was another day at the dump. James gets murdered. Peter's going to get murdered. There's a king that thinks he's God, and he treats people poorly, and that's just another day at the dump. Trash is trash. We put up with a lot of garbage, and Jesus promised us we would put up with a lot of garbage in this world. But, as Dr. Dobson quoted, I want to read the full text. Here's the good news. Revelation chapter 21, verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven, John said, and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth, the dump, at least the earth, had disappeared, and the sea was also gone. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All things are gone forever. The dump is gone. It's over. No more trash. Isn't that great? And I would add, and he gets the last laugh. God gets the last laugh. And if you know him and you look forward to being with him, we get the last laugh as well. There will be laughter in heaven. There'll be no tears, no pain, no sorrow, no goodbyes, no death. But there will be laughter. And those who thought they reigned on this earth, the joke's on them. Because my God is the ultimate king, and he laughs at those who think they are in charge. Isn't this great stuff? What an amazing event in the life of Peter of the early church. Well, thanks for joining us here in front of this Alcatraz of the Rockies, and I pray that the men in there, no matter what they have done, and again, there's terrorists and all kinds of people who are dangerous to our country, I pray that they repent and change their mind about who God is and take him as their God. We love you. Thanks for doing this journey with us. God bless you.